Hey, what's up? Welcome. This has been Thinking About. I'm Jackie, and today I'm going to tell you how I made roll-up blinds, or roll-up Swedish blinds, I think is the correct term. But yeah, so we're going to do that. To get started, I'm going to give you information on what you need. For me, I'm covering a glass window that is pretty narrow. I think it's about 60 centimeters wide and like maximum 150 high, like the glass plane itself within the window. So for you need to measure whatever window space you want to be covering and work out the fabric need from there. For me, that meant I only needed I'm going to make two of them. So I had about 2.5 meters of fabric. I had a main front facing fabric. This is a cotton. It's fairly thin, but it has zero stretch. I picked it because I liked the pattern and the color. And then you'll need a lining fabric. This fabric should roughly match the color of your main fabric, because when the light comes through, it's going to come through both sets of fabric. And let's say you picked an orange one and then you pick a blue pattern, that blue and orange is going to mix as the light comes through and give you a funky color. So I picked this one. This is a cotton drill. For me, luckily the fabric was wide enough that I could cut both fabrics just in half to get the two planes I needed. You'll also need some wood. The top piece I used a rectangle because I wanted it to lay pretty flat on my window. This is a piece of pine. I can tell you its measurements. It is 20 by 80 millimeters and it was 120 centimeters long. So again, I got to cut that in half to get two of them. So just measure how wide you need them and then get the width of wood you need respectively. Mine is a pretty small blind, so I just got pretty light pieces. If you're making a bigger blind, you kind of need to scale these out. And then I got a round, I think a dowel, I think is what this is called, is also made of pine. It doesn't have its measurements on it. I know it was 120 wide, but they're basically the same if I hold them up next to each other. I'm gonna need 3 kind of rings. I had these already at home. You can get smaller, like just smaller rings, but I just wanted to use up what I had. You're going to need 3 of them, 2 to go on each side and an additional one to go on the side of the curtain you're going to use to pin and pull up. And you're going to need hooks. I used these bad boys. I think they're called like an eye hook. But these went into my door and they also went into the dowel. So they kind of all just hook onto each other. I wanted to be able to take the curtain off really easily. So I can unscrew these, take the dowels out and wash the curtain. So that's what you'll need. Oh, you'll also need thread and rope. A disclaimer here, for this curtain I used a really crappy piece of rope. I have nicer rope somewhere in my house that I couldn't find, but you'll need a fairly thin, I actually have it here. You'll need a fairly thin piece of rope. Yeah, that's that. Let's get into it, okay? So to begin with, we're going to cut both sets of fabric, the lining and the outer fabric. So for me, as I mentioned before, the width of my fabric is as wide as my window. If it's not exactly half, obviously just measure it as wide as you will need it, including seam allowance of probably about 2 centimeters on each side. So let's pretend you need 60 centimeters. That's 60 centimeters plus 4 is 64 centimeters wide. That really hurt my wrist. I make eye contact with a magpie. Now I'm scared it knows who I am and it will come back and haunt me. As I also mentioned, my outer fabric is actually slightly wider than my lining fabric, but that's okay with me. It just means on the back I'm going to have kind of like a border of fabric, but if it's exactly the same width, just follow the same steps and yours won't have that exterior border fabric on the back. So once you've done that, fold them both in half, good sides facing, and just pin along the seam. So it's pretty straightforward. You just pin along the seam. Mine obviously will be wider on one side, but we're not stressing. And once you've done that, you're just going to sew it as a straight stitch the whole way along. And then we're going to make the bottom hem. So while it's still good sides facing, pin along that bottom edge and do a straight stitch along there. For me, as I said again with this border, I just made sure everything was laying flat and it wasn't bunching on one side, because this seam, once you've sewn it, will kind of dictate where the fabric lays. And then once I've done that, obviously I just fold it inside correct way out and just make sure I haven't missed anything and the edges look nice and neat. And I'm going to get around to now making my outside seam. This is so that my fabric doesn't move around. If you're doing your fabrics are going to be flush and you don't have this border I have, try and sew as close to the edge as possible, unless you want an intentional hem that people can see, because this will be visible. So once I did that, I just sewed a straight stitch along that seam. I sewed right along where the edge of my border is, so that it looks nice and neat and consistent. And obviously you do this on both sides of the fabric to be consistent. I thought that was obvious, but I thought I should also mention it because I don't want to forget things, but I also don't want to be patronizing. So yeah, that's where we're at with this. Now that I've done that, I'm just putting in my bottom dowel. So I just laid the bottom dowel along the edge and I just rolled the hem up until I found the correct width, that it would be tight enough that it stays in there, but loose enough that I can take it in and out. And you'll see here that I have string attached or rope attached. Ignore this. I originally did this wrong. So you shouldn't be sewing in the rope like I am here. I just didn't want to redo this step. I didn't want to redo this step. And I think it's always nice to be honest that we all make mistakes and we all realize that we might need to redo things. Now we're getting onto the top dowel or top piece of pine. So I measured, I think, 5 centimeters in, and then I put a marking there, and then I put a marking in the middle. And I used my drill just to start a hole and then put these the hook screws in. They can be a bit difficult to get started. That's why I indented it with the drill first. But once you get it, the pine wood's pretty soft, so you should be able to twist it in with your hands. And then I wanted to do the top bit. Admittedly, I should have taken the hook eye things out before I did this, but it's also okay. We all make mistakes. So the same with the top. I just pinned it along the edge and I just folded the raw hem under so that you wouldn't see it, and then slipped the dowel out of the top bit. And you can see here it's annoying because I was being lazy and I didn't take off those hooks. And it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but we're going to work out where the holes are. So before stitching anything, we're just going to mark them with a pin. We're going to do a slight cut there, and then we're going to unpin it so that we can sew along that cut with a zigzag stitch. It's really easy to use a button setting on your machine to do this along the edge. The reason I did this after I pinned everything over to fit the dowel in was so that I knew that this was the middle of the top section, so that it will lay flat and it won't be, let's say, halfway down the back and gather strangely. So as I said, I'm just doing a stitch along here just to kind of stop everything from fraying. This won't be visible really, maybe to you, but other than that, it won't be that visible, so it doesn't need to be perfect. And I just do that on both sides. And once I've done that, I will sew a straight stitch along that bottom hem to sew everything in place. And that's actually, I'm pretty sure, all of the sewing that we have for this project. Now we're just kind of up to the steps of the string or the rope and the dowels. The first thing, I lied, there's more sewing. I needed to create a kind of a hook thing for the rings I'm putting in. So using some scrap fabric, I just cut it 10 centimeters wide in total and then cut that in half to 5 centimeters. And I just folded it in half and then folded the raw edges in on themselves. Originally, I did the trick of sewing that just straight along that stitch and then flipping it out. But because this fabric is so hard, then it was kind of impossible. So I just sewed along the top once that was done. And then I measured in from my fabric how deep in I wanted these the rings to sit. So that was 10 centimeters on each side, and then I think about 5 or 6 centimeters on the side that I wanted the pool to sit. And I just placed the rings and their respective rope, I don't know what that would be called, there, just to line everything up, and I will just unpick that and slide them in there. But before I do that, I need to measure my rope. So I folded my blind in half, and then I measured 4 times the width, and then from where the ring will sit along the edge and down the end, I put in the one end of that rope in with each of the rings and just pinned them there, because I'm going to sew over that. That's just so the rope stays in place at the top, but we will loop the rope over the bottom bit. It's a bit loosey-goosey at the bottom. I then, as I said, just sewed along that marking, that where the ring and the rope are, just kind of locking everything in place. And now is officially the end of the sewing. We've done it, we've made it to the end of the sewing part, and now we're just putting up the rope, or putting up the blind. So we're going to just cut back to real life Jackie now to talk to you. Okay, we've reached the end. You did it. You made the curtain. I'm very proud of you. We live, we laugh, we learn, we love. Okay, we did it. We made the curtain. It's great. You did amazing, sweetie. You can replicate this across as many windows as you like. Here's my reveal, and I hope you have a great day. Oh, also, if you liked this video, subscribe and like, please. If you want to, that is. It's free, and it helps me feel better about myself. So with that being said, I'll talk to you later.